let's have our third hour of lecture. So this time we will discuss finally the Hellenists. The Hellenists are Greek-speaking Jewish Christians who were born in diaspora. So they are Jews, but they were not born in Palestine, but in diaspora. Jerusalem was a metropolis of worldwide significance, largely because of Jewish dispersion, for which the city was still the true center of the cult and the symbol of religion of Israel during the early Roman imperial period. Jerusalem was the center, so many Jews who were born outside Palestine, they visited Jerusalem. But the vast majority of all adherents to this religion, Judaism, lived in diaspora and had long since adopted the language and culture of their various places of residence outside Palestine, where most of them had lived for centuries. You remember that in 587 BCE, Israel was destroyed by Babylonian, and the Jews, Israelites, were dispersed beyond Palestine. So for like several centuries, Jews were living outside Palestine. They had become Hellenized. This Hellenization had also affected Jerusalem itself to some degree, where the Greek language was as much at home among Jews as Aramaic. Aramaic was their mother tongue, but Greek was their second important tongue, actually standard word. Also, there were numerous visitors from all areas of the Mediterranean world to Jerusalem. So Hellenists, Greek-speaking Jews, were not unusual phenomenon in Jerusalem, right? So Jews who were born outside Palestine, they were often visiting Jerusalem. The first church in Jerusalem was composed of both Aramaic-speaking and Greek-speaking Christians. So Jews and Jews born outside of Palestine, it is very likely that each group had its own worship services. Like, if you go to Korean churches in this area, they have a Korean worship service, and then they may have another worship service like in English for foreigners or some other members of Korean who feel more comfortable with speaking in Korean. The first known conflict in Jerusalem church occurred regarding food distribution among the Hellenist widows, according to Acts 6:8. In this older story, apart from the 12, the symbolic representative of the Aramaic-speaking members, other community leaders emerged who spoke Aramaic and claimed for themselves the title diakonos, deacons, a title used elsewhere for preachers and missionaries. So deacons were originally preachers and missionaries like apostles. According to Luke, the 7 Hellenists were chosen for the daily service, diaconia, at table, clearly a secondary construction. Why would exactly the Hellenists, the Greek-speaking Jews, be chosen for table service? So although in Acts, deacons were chosen for daily service, like a table service, distributing food, but they were, in the beginning, very important church leaders, like preachers and missionaries. Therefore, if you read the story of Hellenists by Luke in Acts, you will find that Philip and Stephen, they were preachers, very important and charismatic preachers. As is reported in the following stories in Acts, the seven deacons appear as powerful preachers and missionaries. Luke presents the 7 somehow inferior to the 12, for the sake of harmony between the two churches, represented by them, the Jerusalem church and the Antioch church. So the Jerusalem church, their leaders are the 12 apostles, and Antioch church, their leaders were from 7 deacons. So 2 major groups with 2 major leader groups. So let's see. So the next question is, what do Hellenists believe, and what's the significance of Stephen's martyrdom? Obviously, they were more for law-free gospel. In Acts 6:11, Luke gives the reason for the eruption of the persecution that led to Stephen's martyrdom. Stephen is accused of criticizing Moses, that is the law, not law, but the law, and of blaspheming. So criticizing Moses and blaspheming, you know that story, right? Stephen's martyrdom. It appears in this story that there was a controversy in Jerusalem, especially regarding the validity of the law of Moses for the Christians. This was the key issue for the first churches in Jerusalem. This question would reappear as the central issue in Paul's debate with the leaders of the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. While the Jewish believers in Jerusalem took a more conservative stance, the Jews in Jerusalem took a more conservative stance toward the law. That means that they were prone to keeping the legal requirements of the law. The Hellenist believers took a more liberal stance. They were more lenient upon keeping the law. This may explain why the 12, symbolizing the Aramaic-speaking Jewish believers, were exempt from the great persecution in Jerusalem. So the Aramaic-speaking Jewish leaders, 12, they were exempt from persecution, while others, especially the Hellenists, fled, escaping from the persecution. That it was mainly the Hellenists that were the targets of persecution is evidenced in the story of Philip. So Hellenists were the major targets of the persecution. The persecution arose in Jerusalem. Luke, after having stated that those who had been scattered went about preaching the word, presents the story of Philip as an example of the missionary activity. So Philip appears as a missionary rather than simply like a deacon who is serving at the table. Philip was one of the 7 leaders of the Hellenists, one of the 7 leaders. Thus, the beginning of Christianity that is free from the obligations of the law belongs in the Jerusalem community itself, not Paul. So, the beginning of Christianity that is free from the obligation of the law, they belong to the Jerusalem community, especially Hellenist group, not Paul. And Paul learned from this law-free gospel from the Hellenists. The dispute about the validity of the law and Stephen's martyrdom took place within a year or two after the death of Jesus. It's not surprising that this type of Christianity was unable to make much headway in that city. Okay, so Hellenists, including Stephen and Philip, these Hellenists were for law-free gospel. They didn't require the Gentiles to abide by the law. Okay. Now let's move to next page. Okay. In the story of Stephen's martyrdom, Paul appeared to participate in this persecution. If you read Acts 7:58, Paul was a young man at that time, and when Stephen was martyred and killed, Paul was holding the clothes of those Jews who stoned Stephen to death. If Paul's own testimony in Galatians 1:22, he persecuted the Christians, but he was unknown to Christian community in Judea before his call, and even for some years thereafter, is right, then the Lucan report of Paul's participation in Stephen's martyrdom may be legendary. The expulsion of the Hellenists, however, resulted in the founding of communities outside Jerusalem and Judea. So ironically, after the persecution of martyrdom of Stephen, the Hellenists were persecuted and they left Jerusalem and they went to Antioch and founded the Christian communities outside Jerusalem, especially in Antioch. Of course, Philip went to Samaria, and but Antioch was the major city for the Hellenists. So they were later joined by Barnabas and a Jew from diaspora of Cyprus. Barnabas was a Jew from diaspora of Cyprus, so he was obviously a Hellenist. who had earlier been a member of the Jerusalem church. As you remember, in Acts chapter 4, right after the Pentecostal event, Barnabas sold all of his belongings and put them down in front of the apostles. So he was known for his generosity. And Barnabas joined the Antioch church. And also, after his conversion, Paul joined this Hellenist church in Antioch. So originally Jerusalem and Antioch. So Hellenists belonged here, but they moved to Antioch. And Barnabas and Paul joined the Antioch church. And the church in Antioch was the center for missionary activity. So here, after his conversion, Paul joined the Hellenist church in Antioch, which became the capital city for the Gentile mission. So the church in Antioch was the major church for the Gentile mission. So so far we have seen, how the church in Jerusalem was erected and founded, and then how Hellenists moved to Antioch, and then second major church in Antioch was founded. And that that church is about to be the major focal center for the Gentile mission. And obviously, Paul and Barnabas were two major leaders there. So we will discuss that next week. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Please, listen carefully to my lecture, and then I'll leave assignment, and then do that, and then post it, upload it to the Blackboard. Don't send it to me via email, okay? No email, but upload it to our Blackboard. All right? Thank you so much. I'll see you guys later. Bye now.